The cipher's first thread, the steady smell of dust, lemon oil, and old paper. Afternoon sun found the seams of Dr. Arthur Pellman's books and lit them up like teeth. Inspector Elias Grant moved slowly through the room as if the floor itself might cough up a secret. He had ordered everything left untouched. The housekeeper's teacup sat cold on the mantel, the candlestick still warm where the victim had used it to read. The parchment, the one with the strange symbols, was now under glass on the evidence table. Elias stood over it and felt the same prickly certainty you get when a loose stitch shows the shape of the whole garment. Whoever had written those marks had meant them to be solved. It was a message for a mind that loved puzzles, circles within circles, a lattice of prime numbers, an odd rune that looked like a serpent eating its own tail, not the rant of a madman. The work of someone trained to think in patterns. The assistant said Dr. Pellman had been working late on cataloging his shipment from Alexandria. Sergeant Pritchard reported. He complained of being watched. Said someone had been leaving him odd slips in the reading room. Elias studied the scrawled handwriting at the bottom of the parchment. Neat, economical, almost forbiddingly cultured. He flipped it over. The back was charcoal black where someone had burned the margins after writing. Someone had tried to destroy what they'd written. Enough remained to send chills down a man's spine. He questioned the house staff. The housekeeper, Mrs. Enderby, shook with tea in her hands when she told Elias her story. Doctor always locked the library at night, she said. But I sometimes heard a knocking on the cupboard in the early hours. He thought it rats. He told me it sounded like mathematics, a rat that counted. Elias let the line sit. The assistant, a pale young man named Jonas Hawley, was shaking when he was brought into the study. His lips kept trembling as if words were brittle. "We found a tiny scrap under the scroll case, sir," Jonas stammered, and produced an oblong of paper wrapped around wax. The wax bore a crude seal, a pair of opposing compasses, a symbol Elias recognized from old lodges and clandestine societies. Inside the scrap was a simple line of numerals and a single word scratched across the back in a hurried hand. Murdoch. Elias had seen the name before in the keeper's ledgers, a late 19th century patron who paid handsomely for rare scrolls. But the ledger showed no record of a Dr. Murdoch in the museum's current catalogs. The name, therefore, was either a ghost or a key. He took the scrap to the museum at once. The curator, Miss Haversham, wore her grief like a stiff collar. She led Elias into the restricted stacks with only a glance. Pellman was cataloging the Ethiopica crate, she said. One manuscript went missing from the first unwrapping. He said the script contradicted the rest, an odd cipher working behind the margin notes. He kept muttering about a signature in the watermark. He said it had a name, Murdoch. Elias turned the ledger page. The entry for Murdoch was minimal, a donation, a note, acquired by personal commission, handled discreetly. The handwriting matched the style on the parchment. Back at the crime room, Elias laid the parchment next to the newly unwrapped Ethiopic folio Miss Haversham had brought. Under angle light, he could just make out a watermark, a faint wheel with 7 spokes, and a tiny dot near the 3rd spoke. On the folio, Ismargin someone, or something, had scribbled faint formulae that corresponded eerily to the numerals on Jonas's scrap. Elias traced the path of his finger across the page and felt like a man treading an unseen seam. He folded the scrap and pressed it to his lips, a private, superstitious gesture that sometimes steadied him. Murdoch, he said aloud. The name felt like an instruction now. Then Jonas's voice came again, smaller this time. Inspector, there was more. In the fireplace, a lighted match with traces of phosphorus. And a single hair, long, black. Elias felt the room tilt. A hair with phosphorus on it. That was not the scrap of a casual intruder. That was the careful hand of someone who could enter when houses slept, burn what ought to be secret, and leave a signature in a thread so small it seemed invisible. He ordered the hair tested. He ordered the library logs for every night this month. He ordered the museum safe open for the list of donors who preferred anonymity. Outside, as night fell and lamplighters came by with poles of flame, Elias took the remaining parchment one last time and mapped the numerical sequence against the museum's storage layout. The numerals were not primes by chance. They were coordinates. Each matched a folio shelf, each folio a date, and one of those dates was the anniversary of a burnt manor house 20 miles west whose owner had vanished in 1869. The Murdoch estate. Elias felt a cold certainty. This was not a murder of envy or passion. It was a summons. The killer wanted a mind to play. He wanted a player. He wrote 2 words in his notebook and underlined them twice. Find Murdoch. Outside the window, through London's dim gaslight and the curling fog, a silhouette crossed the street. Elias watched it pass, unaware his investigation had already been whispered into darker corners. The game had begun. Part 3. Ink and Shadows. Inspector Arthur Wren sat alone in his candlelit office, the streets of Whitechapel just beyond the frosted glass. The letter from the killer signed, only with the strange interlocking monogram lay in front of him. Each curve and stroke seemed intentional, as if the killer wasn't just taunting the police, but teaching them something. Wren had brought in Dr. Edmund Clay, a cryptographer who had once worked for the British Admiralty during the Crimean War. Clay examined the paper with his magnifying lens. "This is no ordinary cipher," he murmured. "It's a polyalphabetic substitution. But there's something more. The spacing, the flourishes, they're deliberate misdirections." The inspector frowned. "You mean the killer wants us to waste time?" Clay didn't look up. "Yes, and in that time, he will kill again." That same night, a message arrived by courier no return address. Inside, a folded scrap of parchment with only 4 words. "The tailor knows more." But the tailor in question, Mr. Percival Ashe, had disappeared 2 nights earlier. Part 4. The Cryptographer's Dilemma. By early January 1888, Inspector Arthur Wren had brought in Professor Elias Harrow, one of the few surviving experts in antiquarian ciphers. Harrow examined the 3rd code, left beside the body of a dock worker found near the Thames, and his face went pale. "These are not simple puzzles," he murmured. "They're fragments from the Alchemic Concord, a banned manuscript destroyed in the Great Library Fire of 1812. Wren frowned. "You're saying our killer has access to something that shouldn't even exist?" Harrow nodded. "And he's reconstructing it, body by body." The 3rd code, when partially solved, pointed to an abandoned textile mill in Shoreditch. When the yard raided it, they found nothing except for a massive wall covered in symbols and unfinished sketches. The artisan had been there, watching them chase his breadcrumbs. And then, in the corner, carved into the wood, were 5 chilling words. "You are solving yourself." Part 5. The Mad Genius Revealed. A breakthrough came when a young street urchin named Tom claimed he seen a man leaving the scene of the last murder tall, with a long dark coat and carrying a small carpenter's tool chest. Cross-referencing old police records, Wren discovered something disturbing. There had been a gifted engineer, an inventor named Silas Crowther, institutionalized in 1879 after attempting to improve the human condition through violent experimentation. He vanished 2 years later. Silas was rumored to have been obsessed with hidden messages and mechanical puzzles. A man who believed that life itself was a code only the worthy could decipher. If Crowther was indeed the artisan, every murder wasn't just a killing. It was a step toward completing a masterpiece only he understood. Part 6. The Final Cipher March. 1888. Another body, a society widow, was found at the steps of the British Museum. This time, the code was different. The symbols were cleaner, more precise. Harrow worked night and day to solve it, until at last the translation came through. Tomorrow night, the clock will strike 13. The yard flooded London's clock towers with guards, but at 1 the following night, a single bell tolled from an abandoned foundry in Limehouse. Inside, Wren found Silas Crowther waiting, standing beside an unfinished brass contraption the size of a carriage. He smiled as they approached. "You've solved my codes," he said softly. "Now, solve me." Crowther made no move to run, no fight, no resistance. He simply handed Wren a final slip of paper before being taken away. It read, "This was only the prologue." Part 7. The silent months Silas Crowther's arrest was front-page news across London. People expected the killings to stop, and for 6 long months they did. But Crowther never spoke in prison, not a single confession, no explanation. He would sit in his cell, sketching endless patterns on scraps of paper, then tearing them up before the guards could take them. Inspector Wren visited often, trying to pry something from him. "Why did you kill them?" Wren demanded one evening. Crowther simply smiled. "Why do you breathe?" Then, in August 1888, a package arrived at Scotland Yard, addressed to Wren personally. Inside was a new coded message and a lock of human hair. The code was unlike any they'd seen before. And when Harrow solved it, the message was short, chilling. The game continues. Part 8, the copycat, or the partner. The next murder mirrored the artisan's work exactly, down to the placement of the body and the style of the code. But Crowther had been in his cell the entire time, which left 2 possibilities. A copycat was trying to mimic him, or Crowther had never worked alone. The killings escalated again, but the codes were becoming more elaborate, hinting at deeper layers, names, dates, and what appeared to be a blueprint for something massive. Harrow realized something terrifying. These aren't random murders anymore. The ciphers are building toward a location, and when we find it, we may wish we hadn't. Part 9, the escape. In late September, the unthinkable happened. Silas Crowther escaped. The official story was that he overpowered a guard during transport, but Wren suspected otherwise. The guard's last words before dying had been, "The clock struck 13. 3 days later, the killings doubled. 2 bodies in one night, both with messages referring to the great mechanism. Crowther was no longer hiding, he was accelerating. Part 10. The revelation it all came together on a foggy night in November. The final cipher led Wren, Harrow, and a squad of yard detectives to the abandoned catacombs beneath Clerkenwell. There, by the light of oil lamps, stood a monstrous brass and steel machine. Gears, pistons, and rotating dials covered in etched symbols. Crowther stood beside it, hands stained with grease. "You still don't see it," he said. "Every death, every code." It was to make this possible. A machine that can write the future. Before they could arrest him, Crowther pulled a lever. The machine roared to life, and a sheet of paper slid from a slot, covered in fresh symbols. Harrow read them aloud, his voice shaking. "Inspector Wren dies tomorrow at dawn." And then the machine went silent. Part 11. The night before dawn, Inspector Wren didn't sleep. The machine's prophecy, his death at dawn, repeated in his mind like a drumbeat. Harrow tried to reason with him. "It's just a trick, Wren. Crowther's machine can't see the future. He's manipulating you." But deep down, Harrow wasn't sure. The previous codes had predicted details no one else could have known, including the exact location of victims before their bodies were found. That night, the streets of London felt unnaturally silent. Gas lamps flickered as Wren walked home, revolver in his pocket. Every shadow seemed to move. Part 12. The strike at 5:47. I'm home. Just as the first light of dawn touched the rooftops, it happened. A carriage came speeding toward Wren's townhouse, its driver masked, its wheels wrapped to silence the sound. The door burst open, and 2 men lunged inside. One carried a knife. Wren fired twice. The first shot missed. The second struck one attacker in the shoulder, but the knife came down, grazing Wren's neck. Harrow, who had been waiting in the alley, charged in and fired, trapping the second man. Wren collapsed against the wall, blood trickling from the cut. Not fatal. Not this time. Part 13. The interrogation, the wounded attacker. A gaunt man named Thomas Gage refused to speak until Harrow placed one of Crowther's coded pages in front of him. Gage's eyes widened. He told me this would happen. He said the machine had already written it. Where's Crowther? Wren demanded. Gage laughed bitterly. You're asking the wrong question. Ask when he is. Part 14. The time cipher Harrow spent the next 2 days breaking the latest code. This one wasn't just letters. It contained mechanical diagrams, astronomical alignments, and something that looked eerily like a calendar from the year 1893. 5 years in the future. The message hidden within. When the stars return, so will I. It dawned on Harrow. The great mechanism wasn't just a code-writing machine. Crowther believed he had built something that could predict events years in advance, or perhaps even cause them. Part 15. The vanishing before they could act, Crowther struck again, but not with a murder. Instead, he left a single sheet of paper in the yard's front office, written in his precise hand. The final code is not for you. It is for the world. That night, the machine vanished from the catacombs without a trace. No one saw it moved. No sounds of heavy machinery echoed through the tunnels. Crowther was gone. So was the great mechanism. And 3 months later, the killing started again. Only this time, they were exactly as the codes had predicted 5 years before. Part 16. The return of the codes. 5 years later, exactly as the final cipher had indicated, London awoke to find envelopes pinned to lampposts across the city. Each envelope contained a page of Crowther's handwriting, stamped with the symbol of the great mechanism. The chilling part? Every letter described a murder that hadn't happened yet, but with details so specific, the yard couldn't ignore them. One note read, Bishopsgate, Thursday, 11:17 p.m. A man in a green waistcoat, throat cut, coin in his left hand. Wren, now an older and more guarded man, felt the dread return. Crowther wasn't dead. Part 17. The Trap. Inspector Harrow devised a plan. They would stake out every predicted murder location before the time given. The first 2 nights, they stopped the killings. On the 3rd night in Bishopsgate, they caught the killer in the act. It wasn't Crowther. He was a young man who claimed he'd never met the professor, but swore that the instructions for the murder had arrived in his mailbox 3 days earlier. The letters were signed only with the initials, MG Part 18, the mechanism's legacy digging deeper. Harrow discovered something more disturbing. The young killer's instructions had been typed on the exact same machine Crowther once owned, down to the imperfections in the ink strike. It meant someone else had the great mechanism. Wren feared the worst, that Crowther had trained successors, each one carrying out a piece of some grand design. Part 19. The face behind the code's A. Break came when a cipher analyst found a pattern in the murder predictions, a pattern that formed a map of London. At the map's center was an abandoned clockmaker's workshop, boarded for decades. Inside, they found the great mechanism and a single chair, still warm, but the man in the chair wasn't Crowther. It was his son, Matthew Godfrey Crowther, Menji Part 20. The final revelation Matthew confessed without hesitation. My father was not a murderer. He was an architect of time. He built the codes not to kill, but to test if the future could be altered. But in trying to prove that, Crowther had created something else entirely, a blueprint for murder that, once in the wrong hands, was unstoppable. When Wren asked where his father was, Matthew smiled faintly. He told me. When the stars return, so will I. The next alignment was in 1901, 6 years away. And somewhere in the shadows of London, the game of codes waited to begin again.